Peppa was warming her hands by the fireplace. A family photo in a frame lay nearby. Papa's face in the photo turned. His eyes became coal black. A smile stretched across his face to his ears. Black drops were sliding down the glass of the frame. Peppa jumped up. She recoiled. The photo under the glass was pulsating. Dark liquid began to appear beneath the frame. Peppa grabbed the frame and ran to the attic. She opened an old chest, threw the photo inside, and slammed the lid shut. A dull thud sounded from inside the chest. Immediately, a second, louder thud followed. Shadows stirred on the walls. They merged into short figures with empty eye sockets. They moved toward the chest. Peppa descended into the basement for a flashlight. Damp stains on the walls were moving, taking on faces from the photo. Distorted, crying faces. In a far corner, an amorphous mass of black sludge and tangled shadows pulsed. Tentacles stretched from it toward the ceiling. Dozens of red eyes on the mass suddenly opened wide and stared at Peppa. Low, shadowy figures crawled out of the mass, creeping toward Peppa across the floor and walls. Peppa ran out of the basement. Standing before her was Daddy Pig, holding that very same frame. Its glass shattered, and inside, the photo had turned black, except for Peppa's silhouette. Black liquid was dripping from the frame onto the floor, sizzling as it hit. I found an old frame in the attic. Daddy's voice sounded metallic and lifeless. Peppa stepped back. Daddy dropped the frame. Black tentacles burst out of it, wrapping around Peppa's legs. Daddy's face began to melt, black drops streaming down as it turned into a shadow. A loud bubbling noise came from below. Suddenly, figures began emerging from darkness. They surrounded Peppa. Peppa pressed herself against a wall. Tentacles squeezed her legs. The shadowy figures approached. More clearly now, they were other family members, all with distorted faces like Daddy's. The black mass climbed up the walls, flooding onto the floor and reaching toward Peppa. Peppa walked into the store. Miss Rabbit was standing by a vending machine fixing something. Pay attention to the mirror on the wall. In its reflection, a different Miss Rabbit. Black eyes, a mouth stretched ear to ear, black liquid dripping from the corners. Peppa said anxiously,
Miss Rabbit, something's not right.
Miss Rabbit approached the mirror. In her reflection, the same terrifying smile. Her face briefly aligned with the reflection. Black eyes, a wide grin.
Trick of the light, haha,
she said casually. Peppa noticed a mirrored jewelry box on the counter. It was empty inside, the bottom made of mirror. But in the mirror of the box, not Peppa's reflection, but writhing black tendrils reaching downward. It wasn't a window, it was a door. Peppa dropped the box and shattered it. Black liquid seeped from the shards, and thin tendrils crawled out of it. They slowly reached for Peppa's legs. Panicked, Peppa ran deeper into the store and leapt into a dark back room, slamming the door shut. On the back wall, a large antique mirror covered with a dusty cloth. The cloth twitched as if someone were breathing behind it. Suddenly, it flew off by itself. In the mirror, not Peppa, but a distorted version of her. Black eyes, a wide, unnatural smile. Tendrils burst from the mirror, gripping the frame. The reflected Peppa reached a hand through the mirror. Her fingers dripped with black liquid. The real Peppa slowly walked forward, eyes wide. She wasn't moving on her own. There was the sound of glass cracking, distorted Peppa laughter, the rustle of tendrils. Peppa stepped out of the back room. She was smiling, but her eyes flashed red for a split second. A black drop slid from the corner of her mouth, a shard of mirror on the floor. In it, the same horrifying reflection of Peppa flickering. Peppa and George were building a castle in the sandbox. The sand beneath their feet trembled. Suddenly, holes appeared in the ground. Dark, sticky pits. A black tentacle grabbed George's dinosaur. The holes vanished instantly. The sand felt cold, heavy. Round mounds started to rise all around. One of them opened, revealing a black, sandy mouth full of teeth. Peppa grabbed George and they ran toward the house. The mouth growled behind them. Waves of sand rippled under their feet. Evening. The backyard. Shadows were growing longer. From a new hole, George's dinosaur crawled out, covered in shiny black sand, its red eyes glowing. The toy turned its head and looked at Peppa. The dinosaur's teeth had turned black. All the sandy patches in the yard began to stir. Tentacles of black sand stretched out toward the children. The entire yard became a sea of moving black sand. A giant faceless figure emerged. In its mouth, absolute darkness. Peppa and George ran into the house. On the walls, a flickering reflection appeared. Behind Peppa stood 1,000 barely visible sandy hands. Peppa slammed the door shut. George was crying. Black sand tapped against the glass and crept up the walls of the house. Soon it began slipping under the door. Grains of sand fell from the ceiling onto Peppa's shoulder. She ran to the kitchen. The hourglass on the table flipped over, and the sand inside turned black. In the window's reflection, Peppa saw her own face, but her eyes were filled with black sand. The walls began to form a shifting message, written in sand. "You will not leave." Peppa returned to the hallway. A shadow flickered. George was standing there, but without a face and with eyes made of black grains. In the corner of the room, the sand gathered into a tall arch, through which distant laughter could be heard, though no one was laughing. Peppa and Pedro were standing by the shelves with children's books. Peppa noticed an old fairy tale book. Its cover shimmered with uneven light. The surface was cold and sticky. The book opened itself. The pages stuck together and became damp. Black letters slid off the pages in a viscous mass. The mass formed insects with thin, shiny legs. The insects crawled onto Peppa's hands. Peppa screamed. She threw the book to the floor. Nearby books began to open one after another. Swarms of black creatures flew out of the books. Pedro was standing by a small bookhouse watching an open book. Letters from its pages detached and crawled onto his hands. A black mass enveloped Pedro's face. He froze in place. A sharp squeal tore through the air, sounding like tearing parchment. The librarian stood at the end of the aisle, her eyes shining unnaturally. Peppa burst into an empty hall. She dove under the nearest table. The librarian's white shoes stopped nearby. Her socks looked directly at her. Peppa froze. The shoes turned away and moved back. Peppa crawled out from under the table. The librarian was standing by a window. Peppa started crawling toward the archive door. She turned around. The librarian turned her head. Her eyes became spinning reels. Distorted letters flickered on film strips within them. Her mouth stretched into a silent scream. Peppa was pulled into the darkness of the storage room. Shelves rose up to the ceiling, towering over her. The air was thick with dust. She pressed against the door, her heart pounding fiercely. At the end of the aisle stood a figure, motionless. Peppa approached. Pedro was facing a shelf, his face covered with black mass that pulsed slowly. Books on the shelves trembled. Pages fluttered wildly. A mask on Pedro's face turned around. Empty eye sockets stared at Peppa directly. She ran toward the exit. The daylight beckoned at the end. She hurried around a corner. Peppa froze. Standing in front of it was the librarian, blocking her way. Her figure was motionless. Her reel-like eyes spun slowly, flickering Peppa's name on film. Her mouth stretched into that same voiceless grimace. Black shadows oozed from beneath her skirt, flowing onto the floor like ink. Peppa turned back. Behind her, shadows caught up, wrapping around her legs as cold, sticky mass rose upward. The light from behind the door faded the motionless figure of the librarian, and advancing darkness obscured it completely.